Okay.
Hey, Eric, thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Well, hey, thanks, Brian. Thanks for allowing me this opportunity. Yeah, I've kind of got a sordid history that I'll walk you through. I hope some of these things actually attributed to where I've had my success and where I've gotten to at this point. So, first of all, started off, I have a degree in computer science, and I think that technical background helped. From there, I actually went and played lead guitar in a band for 6 nights a week for 3 years. Yeah, that was interesting, and I think that also helped. I think in terms of opening me up and allowing me to interact with people better. And then from there, I got into the technology space. So everything from large companies, small companies, infrastructure, applications, opening up new markets. And so that kind of led me to, by the way, I also I was in leadership positions. At one point, I actually had a $100 million business that I was running with about 200 people in my organization. But most recently, I've been working as a contributor. So I worked for the last 5 years for a company called Elation, where I actually helped open up the federal space for them.
Well, so it sounds like you have a diverse interest base. Is that true?
You would say that.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's all it all contributed. When I look around at some of the things that I think that make me unique, I think every part of my experience, and whether it was the technology side or the size of company, or even just living through the changes that we've all gone through over the past couple decades, right? When you think about early on, people would hide behind voicemail, and then email came along, and then the web with all of the information that was available. All those changes and the ability to be able to adapt to that and embrace those kinds of things, I think were really important.
And what was that first year in sales like, given that you didn't have the background? I guess, standing up in front of an audience certainly gives you that confidence, I guess, some.
Yeah, it did absolutely 100%. Yeah, in fact, I was the leader in the band, the manager in the band as well, in terms of dealing with the money, dealing with the club owners. But yes, which was all quite fun, by the way. We can tell stories about that at some later day. But no, I think that aspect of working with not only the band itself, because you're working with a bunch of different diverse personalities in the band, you're working with different club owners, you're interacting with the crowd. I think all those things help me in terms of just being comfortable as myself, if you will, and having a presence to be going on sales calls. Now, my first sales job, though, I worked for NCR at the time. And so they had training classes. So I went through, I don't know, like 20 weeks worth of boot camp training in order to learn some of the basics of selling, which some of that stuff might still apply, but perhaps not a lot.
And what do you think character or makes you a great salesperson?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny because I when I was thinking about this, I had two people that recommended that you and I speak. And so I actually went and asked them because I have my own feelings as well about what I thought was important, but I also got their feedback. So, when I look at it, I mean, there's things that I would say, such as I've sold applications, I've sold infrastructure. So I have a very broad understanding of how all the different pieces fit. So when you think about, especially in the public sector space, I hear clients tell me that, if you don't understand my mission and understand my data strategy, because we're in the data management space, then don't talk to me. You're just basically, you're not providing any value, and I'm not going to engage with you. One of my early companies that I worked with, I remember I had a good relationship with the CIO, and the CIO said to me, we would get the teams together, and then he and I would just go out and actually go to music stores and play guitar and jam together. And he said to me, Eric, your team comes in here and sells me utensils. I don't need utensils. I need to link that to value. And so I kind of, that's one of the key things that both I view as a strength of mine, as well as I've gotten feedback from my team members, is one is I have a way that I can take our technology, and as you know, technology companies have a tendency to just want to sell technology, and bits and bytes don't mean anything in terms of an outcome. So how do you simplify that, which I think is one of my strengths? How do you take advantage of, again, my technical background, but put it in terms that the business people want to understand and can use that to create a positive outcome? So I think that's one of my key strengths. If I look at some of my notes here, one of the things they tell me is I prepare well. I do think it's very important to work with especially my pre-sales, Martha, who had recommended me, working with her to make sure that we're prepped properly for the call, or even prepping if we're doing a presentation for a client and we have sponsorship already, working with that initial sponsor to say, before we go in and present to your executives, what exactly do you want us to present? What's going to resonate? What's going to drive a positive outcome? So all those basic kind of things, preparation, embracing people. I just think fundamentally, what you see, Brian, what you're getting today is what I do on a sales call. I try and be me.
Well, what I heard that was, I think, really key there is you're the translator between the technology and the outcome value that the client wants. And the bigger the organization, the less likely they are to try and bridge that on their own.
Yeah, 100% true. I remember when I was, I've sold infrastructure a lot, and I used to say to my sales teams, I said, infrastructure, it's not a technology that lights up a green or red light on a CFO's desk. But if we don't make that linkage, we're failing. And it goes back to that utensil conversation I had with the CIO in the past.
Yeah, I sold mostly infrastructure as well, components internal to an application as opposed to the big application. And once you get past the user, that everyone else is like, I don't know, what does it do again? Say it slower.
Like that's going to make a difference.
Right. So you had to come up with an analogy or story or have them understand what happens if you don't have this.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and it's funny because I know one of the other people that recommended you and I speak. I'm mentoring. He's one of the new sales reps in our company, and he kind of said the same thing. You have a way of simplifying things and relating that, to again the outcome that we're looking for that particular agency. And when we talk about it, one of the things I tried to impress on him, I've had him go through some training with me, where we're very proud of the fact that our platform is easily operated by a non-technical person. That's one of our strengths. Well, what better way to demonstrate that than to have a salesperson be able to do a basic demo, right? So it would shock you, even though we make that one of our mandatories for all our salespeople, how many people don't do that or don't do that well. They just show up and do a demo, but they don't drive home the experience. Where did we relate this in somewhere else? And so I said to John, John, you haven't lived through the experiences I have, but make them yours. Take my examples that I use when I do a presentation or a demo and make that yours, because that's going to drive home the point for that particular prospect.
That's it. And I got to share that most sales reps aren't armed with this. It's up to them to figure this out.
Right,
sales enablement tells you what the product does, and why it's better. Right.
I agree. And, and I have to say this, when I came into this thing, I thought about, all the different webinars that I've listened to where you've brought up these, not webinars, but the conversations that you've had with other folks. And I don't know that I've got any realizations that you haven't already covered. It's almost more about figure out what you shouldn't do. What are the things that you shouldn't do? It goes back to, let's do this stupid shit where we're overdoing things.
Stop the stupid stuff first.
Exactly. So I'm like, I talk about this because I've seen people come in. At one of the sales reps we hired, another story here, he came in and he had 5,000 contacts in the database. And basically he sent out an email, said, hi, I'm from XYZ company. How do you like me so far? Now, I know it wasn't that short and sweet, but come on, who's going to respond to that? The 3 people that responded said, don't contact me again. So that's not the way to go about it. Just doing that over and over again doesn't move the needle for us.
Now, in the music side, I think it helps build that skill because you have to anticipate the audience's reaction to what you're playing.
Mm-hmm. That's
as
true.
opposed to just playing and hope somebody enjoys it.
Well, yeah, and there's a couple other elements to that too. 100% agree with that, but there's a couple other elements as well. So things such as, there's a structure in music and even in computer science. I think you have a technical background as well. That structure helps you kind of look for patterns that repeat. So again, it's up to us to make those technical patterns, if you will, become more business friendly or business like, but having to recognize those patterns and look for that. The learning a song as a guitar player, I had to, spend hours in some cases repeating it, trying to get better at it. All those things that, again, looking for that pattern, but then practicing it and putting it in play, I think were the key things that I think I apply now as part of my sales job.
Because, working large deals, it is pattern matching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I think reps make the mistake in asking the client how they make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone know how they make a decision?
I've heard you talk about this many times. I will tell you a story. I was doing a deal with one of the major financial institutions in the Northeast, and it was coming up on our end of year. So we go in with my sales guy and the president of my company. And of course, we set up the president of the company to basically position that, after we get through the pleasantries, we'd like to try and get this deal done faster. So in the room is the high-level executive and his three lieutenants. And when we asked him what it would take to get it done, he looked at my sales guy and said, what would it take to get the deal done in my organization? Because we have a better view from the outside looking in than they ever had. Right?
Yes.
So that just drives that point home again, too. Yeah, it's up to us to try and help them understand what a buying process looks like.
Right. Because think of one of those lieutenants trying to figure out how to get this done politically, administratively, legally.
They don't see all the pieces of it. We see it from outside looking in. They may have never been through it before, which is obviously a major scare. And of course, in the federal government, as you know, I know you've done some federal stuff as well too. That whole process could be slightly different. In some respects, it's actually better because in many cases we have to honor the contract vehicles that are already in place. I've had legal people try and tell me they want to negotiate FARs and DARs. I'm like, good luck with that.
Right.
Come back to me in a year, and regardless, we're still going to have to accept everything. Yes. So it's a bit of a learning there. So there's some aspects of selling to the federal government that are a little bit easier, but of course there's the other side of the coin too, where it's a bit more difficult because they don't really make anything.
Right, and they don't go to procurement school. And procurement is usually in a different city. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned like they can buy it, but they need a contract vehicle. And commercial people don't know what that is. Is that a bicycle or an automobile or a plane?
Right.
Like, why? And it's like, well, it doesn't really matter, but they need it. So now you got to get this other person involved and they got to get something for doing it. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, your customer, if you leave it to them, they're going to hunt and peck and most likely give up. And find an easier way.
And that goes again, when I asked some of my team members, what are some of the things that make me perhaps different is that, from a sales perspective or effective from a sales perspective, it's that curiosity on everything. You just got to keep asking questions. I go back to what you've said countless times on your sessions, which is, you got to build rapport with the customer. The first meeting should be about, show up and throw up. I've seen that, too often, and that just doesn't work. So get to know somebody, but also just listen for those clues where you can ask a good question, maybe volunteer a little bit. Don't make it sound like an inquisition. I've had reps do that where it's just, the playbook says ask these 30 questions, and if 15 through, you see that the customer is not acknowledging them anymore because you're just interrogating me. This is not Perry Mason. I'm showing you my age at this point. But anyway, this is not an inquisition, but be able to have that curiosity, really want to go out and learn about them, learn about what motivates them, and then ask them the questions that they need to ask of themselves and of their organization to help us potentially do something positive together.
Yeah. And what part of the sales process is your strongest?
I think certainly building rapport. I think I can get to know people pretty quickly, and I know if I just act as myself, I try and make it fun, but if I act as myself and just ask a lot of questions. So I think that initial qualifying and preparation are probably the two biggest things that I would say are my key strengths.
Because you want that person to get focused on that business value. What type of questions do you ask to sense out what value do they want to get and what's important?
100%. And it's this is what's interesting about the federal government is, you can spend 5 minutes doing research because they all have a mission and they spell out what they're looking for. Yeah. And sometimes it's multi-years and it may be a little bit out of date, but there's some nuggets you can pull out of that. And then there's also, in our case, because we're in the data space, there's the data strategy document. So you pull that up. You spend literally 5 to 10 minutes. It doesn't take long. You spend a few minutes, you pull out a couple nuggets, maybe 3 or 4 things, and that they're trying to accomplish and how we might relate to that. And then try from there, depending upon what those nuggets are, call out what a question, if you will, or call out the information that you're looking for.
And how about as far as like keeping the deal moving? Because that's a big challenge in public sector because they've got infinite priorities, finite budget, and time.
This is a tough one. I don't know that I have the good answer on this one, Brian. I think the best answer is have a lot of deals going, because in the government, money can be yanked at any time. It can be reappropriated at any time. COVID came along. Here's another example. There were a couple of deals that I worked on, literally 2, where I believe I won the business in about the first 90 plus days, but it took 15 additional months to get the PO.
Yeah.
This is when the customer wanted us. We stayed in contact, but they just didn't have any budget allocated. COVID came along, priorities changed, budget was pulled, all of those kinds of things. So the only answer, I've made my numbers the last several years in a row, but the only way I've been able to do that is just to have a lot of stuff going on. So recognize the things that are going to take time, where frankly you could stand on your head and there's nothing you can do to pull it forward, and the others that you can move pretty quickly, and we've seen that happen, work those, but have a combination or enough things going that you can make your number.
And when the younger reps come to you, what do you typically advise them to do?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, that's a couple things, but one is obviously, don't just show up and throw up. That's a given one. When you do a presentation or a demo, make sure you use examples. But the first piece of it is just really to go in and have that first call where it's not, we're going to do a qualification call. Let's just get to know each other. Let's do the research. Let's get to know what my solution might at least have the opportunity to solve from either a mission or a data strategy perspective. So focus on those key areas and don't try and share 100% of what we do. Share 2 or 3 things that make sense, that align with that mission and that data strategy. And then from there, we can talk about other things in terms of skill set, in terms of, can you do an initial presentation to drive that home? And how do you tie it back to the things we just discussed? How do you do a demo that ties back to those initial things that we discussed? And then from there, they come to me with things, and this is just from a process standpoint, when it comes time to learn the systems internally, I can help in that regard, but that's not really what this is about. It was more about, how do we work with that client to make sure that that rep is putting our best foot forward so we have the better chance of winning.
And I think a lot of people struggle with that first call because they feel like if they're not talking, that they're not doing their job.
100%. Yeah, I agree with that.
And then they go, how do you get the right question? It's like, how do I do rapport? It's like, it's not jumping jacks. It's kind of an interpersonal thing.
For sure. Yeah. Some of it's just being comfortable in yourself. And again, Brian, I've been on the planet a long time. So, I've been through enough that I'm comfortable going into any situation, even if the customer is going to yell at me. They can't kill me. So if they're going to yell at me, hey, there's an issue, I'm going to go help them solve that. But I'm comfortable enough that I'm, relaxed enough that I can sit in front of a prospect or on a call with a prospect and just listen to them, ask some questions, gather some information. Yes, volunteer some things to reinforce that not only I'm listening, but also understanding how what they're telling me might link to my solution. Again, lighting up that red or green light on a CFO's desk. I recognize CFO and government are a little different, but from my commercial experience, being able to make that linkage. So just being relaxed and being comfortable and having a good conversation, I think is really, really important.
Right. And I think a lot of people might misinterpret it like you're talking about the Redskins or the weather, but it's not that. You're talking, no. It can be, but you want to get it onto the business issues, but not respond to every statement with what your product does and how it solves it.
Yeah, 100% spot on. Again, really in the end, do they care what our product does? No, they care how it solves their problem. Yes. So you've got to make that linkage. And this is another mistake I see with young people, is that there were some of our earlier salespeople where they will start with the left-hand side of the top of the screen and want to show everything about the product all the way down to the right-hand side of the screen. I've even seen some of our technical people want to do that. But that's not what it's all about. That's where the preparation comes in. Understand what we can align with and demonstrate those 2 or 3 things that make sense. Now, in the end, they may ask a bunch of other questions where you have to dig technically, but that's a different conversation. That's not that first conversation, second conversation, or third conversation. That may be the 4th or 5th down the road where they're actually showing tremendous interest. And they want to know, do we scale? Can we connect all the things they need to connect to? Do we have all the capabilities that all the different stakeholders in the organization want? But that's a different conversation down the road.
Right. Because that first meeting is like the first date. You're not meeting the parents,
Right.
You're not bringing, your friends and enemies to show all the issues. It's a chat. Right. It's getting to know each other. It's understanding what you're looking for, what you've tried before, what you like and dislike.
Yeah, and this is where I think, technology companies, we all have a tendency, because especially, we're not public at this point, but whether you're not public or public, we're all driven on quarterly numbers. And, sometimes we have a tendency to want to rush deals and pull deals in. And then sometimes that's possible. But to do that, forsaking that relationship is really not going to get you to the finish line. If anything, it might alienate them and delay the transaction even more. And I've seen that happen in the past. So, it's really kind of understanding at what pace, how can I push this customer, but at the same time, it doesn't have to sound like it's being pushed. It's providing that value to the customer, making them understand how they can help drive a process internally, as opposed to just me trying to demand to get it done because, my end of quarter is coming up.
And I don't know your space at all, so forgive my ignorance, but I got to believe that in the big data space that there's a lot of alternatives.
That absolutely. Well, let's put it this way. There's several key competitors, and we know what they do. And just as in any technology, I'm sure you've seen this in the past, there's probably 100 websites that say the same thing, but they all do different stuff. Yeah. But they're all different. They may do different aspects of it. Because, this is an analogy I use in the data management space. I said, every vendor thinks that they're the center of the universe. And of course, we at Elation, we are the center of the universe. But in the end, we do 2 galaxies really, really well out of all the galaxies that are there. Now, you may need 10, 12, 15 galaxies to solve your problem. And that's where, again, even working with the federal government, as you know, we always end up working with systems integrators. Yeah. And those integrators can bring those other pieces to bear. So even though we think we solve a great problem, we're still part of a bigger picture in solving the overall solution for the prospect. And therefore, we have to embrace these other technologies. So how we fit into that is really kind of a key element as well that we have to stress.
And when did you learn about like the public sector morass? Because you got the system integrators who are usually the users, owners of the big contracts, very influential. Then you got the government who kind of manages the contractors, but also do some stuff on their own. And then you got procurement, either a contract vehicle or you got to get it through the system. It's a lot.
It is. It is. Yeah, no, it's early in my career, I sold to a combination of commercial customers and government customers. So I had some experience then. But when I worked for some of the large companies, I worked for, like the IBMs of the world and those kinds of companies. And, I was selling financial services there. So I had kind of left my public sector or federal experience behind for a decade plus or so. And so when I joined Elation, they actually wanted me to look at a commercial territory, which I did. I did a couple initial commercial deals, which is there's some commonality in terms of certainly the solution, but of course, with the different spaces, it's different selling to a commercial company than it is to the government. So I frankly had to relearn some of that government stuff again. So, everything from, things like the certifications, the security aspects, all those different elements that come to bear, let alone what you brought up in terms of contract vehicles, working with systems integrators. Do you work with the big ones? Do you work with the mid-tier ones? Do you work with the small little VARs that might be able to do one transaction? Are they just a reseller and not an integrator? Are they a combination? All of those different elements. I can tell you, Brian, it's in one of the major accounts that I'm working with, I've probably talked with 60 different integrators of various sizes, from the very large all the way down to the very small.
Yeah. But you came back to federal.
I know. There was an opportunity. I liked it.
Oh, what do you like about it? Is it the size? Is it the complexity? Is it the...
Well, it was opportunistic at the time, being candid. When I joined the company, we had no federal customers, but I very early got onto one that I knew was going to be a major 7-figure a year customer. So I embraced that. And then 8 months into the job, the leader at the time asked me, what do you want to basically be when you grow up? And of course, I always ask my wife, I'm never going to grow up. So let's get that out of the way. But, pick commercial, pick federal. I decided to pick federal because I thought that's where the opportunity was going to be. And it's worked out really well. I've made my numbers ever since with that.
Well, it has much more of a snowballing effect than commercial. Because if you close like a Fortune 50 company, using that name will affect some other companies, but only really the people in the same space. In federal, you get into one agency and all of a sudden the next agency falls and the next one. I found you get into Intel and then all of a sudden DOD falls, then civilian, then DHS has a kingpin type strategy.
100% true. If you look at some of these agencies that I'm doing business with, they might have 20 to 30 different enclaves. And every one of those, even though I'm taking advantage of the first one I sold, is a separate sales cycle. So yes, from that perspective. And then, when you talk about a major agency, they may be part of a parent agency that has 20 other or 10 other major agencies inside that organization. So every one of those could capitalize on it. You could have that snowball effect taking place. And so I think we're at the point now where we're starting to see some of that. But it takes time, Brian. Federal takes a long time to get that thing going.
Time. And how did you get management to understand that? Because unless someone's done it, I remember my manager going into NSA with me. First thing he asked them is, "What do you do?" And they go, "We can't tell you." This enormous facility.
Good luck.
And then after the meeting, he comes out in the parking lot. He goes, "I don't know how you do this all day."
Well, it is a learning curve for an organization.
Because he was question, and they're like, "No."
Where is that site? It's site alpha, site beta.
Right. So you got to kind of talk, gingerly.
Yes.
Without asking questions, but you know what they do. So you kind of say, okay, here's the problem that other people have. Mm-hmm. But how do you convince your management that this is big, but it takes time?
Yeah, so I was lucky. I mean, early, I would say the company hadn't done much federal business, but my leadership, the people I reported to, had some experience in that regard and understood the different motions between commercial and federal. So that helped quite a bit. But we did have to go through, simple things like, are you going to get a order form signed or a purchase order from the customer, right? Yes, they will sign an order form. It's going to reference terms and conditions that typically we can't change as far as in DARs, or flowed terms and conditions we can't change. So they're not going to sign our MSA, but we can do things internally to be compatible and make sure that they reference the right things internally we need to process the order. So that was a little bit of a learning curve. We're well past that now, but early on, again, one of the early attorneys I was working with wanted to look up every one of the flowed terms and conditions that reference the FARs and DARs. And the conversation we had was, hey, have at it. But when you call me in 6 months after you've done all your research and recommend and give me 7,000 red lines, none of it's going to change anyway. So this is the way it works. And we're just going to have to understand that, the protections are in place for us in regard. And frankly, if the government ever did anything where, they stepped out of line, we're going to make money based on suing. Yeah, what are you going to do anyway? Yeah, I mean, you can't do anything about it anyway, or you sue them, which doesn't lead to any positive outcomes either. But there was a little bit of training there, but I was lucky to have leadership early on that was cognizant of this stuff and had done both commercial and federal. And
how do you stay even keeled, if you do, through these long sales cycles?
I do. It's funny, but with the pre-sales engineer who recommended that we chatted, Martha, she even said to me, she goes, I don't think I ever see you get upset. Of course I get, to the point that I want to push things forward and want them to happen faster. We've all got those pressures, but there's just some things that you can control and some things you can't. So what can I control? I can control how many more opportunities that I'm working on so that I can hopefully be immune to some of the cycles that I have to go through on the federal side.
Yeah, cool. Hey, Eric, I really appreciate your time today. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
Oh, hey, well, Brian, thank you for your time today. Appreciate this conversation. Easiest way is Eric Amster on LinkedIn, and check me out there, and I'm happy to link up with anybody.